Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to talk a bit more about the psychology of survival and lessons that I'm learning in watching Season 2 of Alone. I need to warn you that if you haven't watched the show up to Season 8, there are going to be some spoilers in this discussion. And the gist of what I want to talk about is that people are folding left and right on this show, and it's not the people who are struggling with a scarcity of resources. Ironically, it's people who have all their needs met, who are pushing the button, and who are wanting to go home. It's not just about the skill and the know-how. It's about how stubborn can you be? Are you a stubborn enough son of a bitch that you want to survive, that you refuse to give up? So I'd encourage you, before watching this video, just to get some context, go and watch the last video I did entitled Survival Psychology, something about lone wolf survival. I'll post the link to it here. I can't even remember. I've been making so many videos lately. But it was about the show Alone, and I postulated in that video that the show itself is not really about surviving in the elements. It's not so much about showcasing survival skills, although I must say that in Season 2 they're doing a much better job of that, I think, than Season 1. A lot of the construction efforts, if you will, are far more intricate than the participants in Season 1, and perhaps it's because, it's the collective energy of the sport. The people from this year perhaps learned from some of the mistakes of the people last year. So anyways, the central point I was trying to make there was that the real challenge to this whole game called Alone is the ability to be okay with yourself and your own thoughts for extended periods of time. I do believe nothing better exemplifies the points that I made in that video than the events that have transpired so far. In Season 1, you've seen a lot more people dropping due to scarcity of resources and really just physical, material limitations on their survival, not having enough of something. In this season, you're seeing a lot more people fold simply, I don't want to say out of boredom, but it's much more of a choice, it seems, than in Season 1. And I want to draw your attention towards Mike. And the fascinating thing about this is because it's perfectly in line with what I predicted before, and perhaps I'm tooting my own horn a little bit here, but Mike had it made. This guy, he had a rock solid boat that he had made out of some old plastic container that washed up on the shore that he reinforced with some outriggers. He had a shelter, he had a stove, everything was neat and tidy. He had as much water as he needed, he had food, he had no shortage of food. He didn't really encounter too many predators. I think there was a predator or two in the vicinity, but I'm not sure if there was ever contact made. But this guy, he had so much time on his hands that he made himself some dice, and he was shooting dice. That's what he was doing to pass the time. So his thing was, it exactly drives the point home that I was trying to make in that first video, that it comes down to how well you can manage solitude. And I think because Mike had it so easy, and he tried to occupy his mind with different tasks. That was his main thing, is that I gotta keep myself busy with these tasks. And he was doing stuff. He's making boats, building onto his shelter, making furniture and all this stuff, but he just couldn't stand the idea of being separated from the love of his life, his wife. He rationalized that it was better that he invest that year that he might be able to spend out there, and he likely would have, unless there was some major catastrophe that befell him. He probably could have lasted that long. But he was weighing the pros and cons of, well, if I stay out for a year, what's going to happen to me psychologically? If I go back to my wife, am I going to be the same person that I was? And he chose, instead of the $500,000, he basically chose to go back and spend that time with his wife, because he perhaps realized that money is not everything. He had proven that he could do it. He could survive out there. So I give a lot of props to that guy and for the decision that he made, because it drives this point home that survival is the easy part. The main challenge in this game is the solitude factor and being alone by yourself for an extended period of time with your own thoughts. And I think what he feared was some sort of self-induced psychosis where he would get into his head so much, kind of like being in isolation when you're in prison, that your personality changes in a way that it can't be changed back to what it was. So I think it was around day 20 that he decided to opt out. And then I want to draw your attention to, conversely, the guy named Larry. And this guy is struggling nonstop. You know, he's constantly fighting and resisting everything. He swears probably like 1,000 times an episode, it seems. He's went on some pretty wicked rants, and no disrespect to either of these guys. I'm sure, you know, at some point we might even cross paths in the comment section. Hopefully, it would be great if I could talk with some of them one-on-one. But, and as you're going to see here, I'm actually leading up to a compliment here, because the funny thing is that Larry was the one who was struggling a lot more. You know, this mouse was terrorizing him every night. And I know that sounds weird that a mouse could terrorize you, but when you're, you know, when you're in that situation, and it's easy for somebody to say, well, just set up a trap and catch the thing. You know, if you're not there, you're not there, right? So anyways, this mouse was making his life a living hell. He was trapped in this one region, and he basically had to get out of this region. It involved moving camp, which is a big gamble, of course, in that show. And finally he did that, but he was still, you know, constantly up against the elements, rubbing against the elements. Not like Mike, who just had a peace with everything. And, you know, maybe that had something to do with where they were and where they started, but there's probably a big personality thing there too. And I think Larry even talked about, you know, how he's emotionally unstable at times, and that's something he's trying to work on. He goes into the reasons why that I'm not going to go into, but it's just to show that Larry survived longer than the guy who had it made. The guy who was the most stressed out in the show up until this point has survived longer than the guy who pretty much had everything. And I do mean everything: food, water, shelter, a boat, and so much time on his hands that he was making himself board games. What does that tell you? The guy who had absolutely nothing almost, who, you know, was struggling to get food, who was basically landlocked, was being terrorized by mice, who has emotional issues. What does that tell you about survival? What can that teach us? You know, and I'm not saying that Mike didn't survive either. In a sense, though, he did opt out of the game. Now, I think he had a perfectly good reason for doing so, but I have a theory about all of this, and I think that it's that once we reach a certain level of perfection in life, things just become boring and life doesn't become worth living anymore. And I made a comment about this in my original video, that I theorized that it would be just as hard for a person to survive with all the amenities of civilization, everything at your disposal. If you were by yourself in a mansion, it would be just as hard to survive in that situation as it would in a wilderness situation. And nothing proved that point more than Mike pushing that button and deciding to go home, because life simply was not worth it at that point, even though he had it all. Now, I would go a step further and theorize that if Mike had perhaps more challenges, then maybe it wouldn't have went down like that, because maybe he would have been so preoccupied with the idea of survival that there would be no time to be bored and thinking about Barbara. I'm not sure if that was her name, his wife's name. You know, that is a theory of mine, that maybe if there was more struggle and, you know, something going on, maybe he wouldn't have time to be ruminating about those things and wouldn't have time to go into that pre-psychotic mode, or at least that anticipatory pre-psychotic mode where you think you're going to become psychotic because you have so much time on your hands. So I theorized that if Mike maybe had a few more challenges, and, you know, it's not to say that he didn't, you know, he obviously did have a lot of challenges. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that went on in camera that you don't see, and he's just that good of a survivalist that it wasn't a challenge. So, you know, I mean, really, Vancouver Island does provide everything you need. You have your fish, you know, you have abundant forests, you have shelter, you have water, you have everything you need if you can just find it and find a balance with it all, and that's what he did. It's almost as if once your life starts to be so perfect that it becomes so heavenly in a sense if you're by yourself and there's nobody to share it with. And this is the whole moral of the story of the show that is Alone. Life ceases to be worth living. And this is a message for the lone wolf, because there's another individual in that show who did push the button after he made himself a sweat lodge. He had a good sweat. He had this spiritual epiphany that he didn't want to go out in a bad way. I can't remember his name right now, but I'll post the name on the video here. He wanted to go out still enjoying nature and still wanting to live out there, which he insisted that he did. He just pushed the button also because, you know, he just realized that he didn't want to do it anymore. He just got bored. Once again, you have it made. There's not enough struggle. You get bored. There's nothing left to prove. It really goes to show that the people who are going to win this game, with the exception of maybe Jose, because he seems to be quite at peace with everything. That guy just seems cool as a cucumber. He's probably going to win it. I can't say for sure. Obviously, it's anybody's game. It could be the Roughnecks. And by Roughnecks, I mean, you know, Larry, some of the other guys that are sort of resisting a bit more, not finding a good flow, a good rhythm with things, at least not on camera as we're seeing. Of course, all the members of the show who might glean this video are laughing because they know the answers and they probably know I'm way off, but you know, who knows? That's what my prediction is anyways. I just think that that ego, which is fueling Larry right now, that stubbornness, that will, that is what it takes to keep this body vital. It's not just about the skill and the know-how. It's about how stubborn can you be. Are you a stubborn enough son of a bitch that you can survive, that you want to survive, that you refuse to give up? Because you can be the nicest, most peaceful. I mean, you can be like Nicole. I mean, she's got bears that are friends now, apparently. They meet at the water hole every other day. I mean, she's living the peaceful life as well. And that's why I kind of worry about her, that she too is going to get bored unless there's a challenge presented. And I want to bring you back to a metaphor that was used in The Matrix. And I think it was when Neo was talking to the architect. He was telling him why they made the Matrix the way it was with inequality. Basically explaining why the world was the way it was. You know, why, if you were going to make a Matrix, why not just have everybody equal and have everybody have the same amount of wealth and fulfill everybody's desires? The agent tells him, he's like, people didn't like that people were resisting that reality because they just became too bored, you know, because there was no point in living if there wasn't a challenge. And that's the point I'm driving home. The only way that you can survive under these conditions, and perhaps maybe this is what I'm going to get at, I think this is the real gem to take away here, is that you can survive by yourself, but you cannot thrive by yourself, because once you start thriving by yourself, you get lonely. And it's only when you're surviving by yourself that you can stave off that loneliness. Because once things start working out, things start going your way, that's when you have too much time on your hands to think. And that's what we as humans do, is think. And that's what separates us from the other animals, is our ability to think with our cerebral cortex. And that's why we have language and words to communicate with one another. If we didn't communicate with each other, there would be no reason to have words. So once you have a moment to sit down after all the smoke clears and you've got all your food, you got all your wood, you got your water, you got shelter, everything that you would possibly imagine, then there you are with all these words, but nobody to share them with all these thoughts and insights and nobody to share them with. So what do? Well, you push the button. I think we can also look at it in this way, is that struggle is a blessing, that challenges are a blessing, because without them, there is no point. So I guess what I've learned from this show is that be grateful for the challenges set in front of you if you were ever a lone wolf survivor in any situation, because it's a mixed blessing in that it's saving you from the slippery slope that is your own neurotic, negative, self-defeating thoughts about the situation by which you talk yourself out of wanting to live. Now, to further my point, I'm going to give you another spoiler and an excerpt from episode 8, because I'm actually watching episode 8 as I dictate this. It's not a major spoiler, but it's a pivotal event in one of the participants' experiences on the show. So Justin, in dedication to 22 veterans that commit suicide every day, I believe, has ascended a mountain for no other reason other than an honorarium to the veterans who take their own lives. And now in doing this, he's exhausted himself. He almost hurt himself. He used a lot of energy, probably 10,000 calories easy, to getting up that mountain. He wasted a lot of time. And then he thought that when he got back down to ground level that he was probably going to press the button and call it quits. Now the guy says that he's revitalized and he's rejuvenated after that experience. So it really adds more fuel to this fire that I'm trying to bring forth here, and that's saying that challenge, pain and suffering and struggle are what fuel our desire to live, or they create character, they make us stronger. So don't aspire to just thrive and be at peace with things. There was something about that experience that invigorated him and kind of resuscitated his interest in doing something, because the guy should have moved a long time ago, but he's just been remaining sedentary in this camp that's been flooded out for the longest period of time. Now finally, after conquering that mountain, and it seems like he's conquered some psychological or emotional demons as well in doing that, he now has the motivation to finally take things to the next level and move his camp. So this is the perfect example of what I'm trying to talk about, is that sometimes those painful and challenging experiences that you're going to suffer in the tribulations of battling the elements are going to actually increase your motivation to survive, not decrease it, or at least increase your motivation to stay there and do this, not decrease it, because it gives you something to do. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.
Check out the Canadian Preppers Network blog, an excellent resource for survivalists and preppers.